Okay, this is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. It's Madaraka Day and CT's waving the flag.
This is CT waving the flag.
It don't stop. I'm telling you, it's
You
great.
sound coerced. You need to look more enthusiastic.
You should have seen him at 6 o'clock. It was great. I wish I had taken a picture. Maybe John got something like that, but it's great.
What do you mean?
The needing tea factor is kicking in.
I am enthusiastic.
If you say so.
Yes, I am enthusiastic.
Very good.
Toned down, but enthusiastic.
Do you want
Fair
to
enough.
see CT waving the Kenyan flag? Spice FMKE on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You'll be able to catch the action. I'm telling you, it's riveting stuff.
Enthusiastically.
It's Madaraka Day. 9 minutes after 6 o'clock this morning, it's Kenya's biggest conversation. In the studio with you, CT Muga, Nduoko, and our guest host for this week, Wanjiro Gikonyo. And we continue to look at the financial situation in the country. And as those conversations continue this hour, we're going to kick it off with today's proverb.
When a needle falls into a deep well, many people will look into the well, but few will be ready to go down after it.
So true. So true. That is us. Yeah, really. I mean, I think the urge to engage and get involved in issues is seldom done. We like to talk, we like to philosophize, we are very good at that.
And
but
we thank God
action.
for social media.
Yeah.
At least it gives an opportunity to get engaged.
Oh, that's engagement? I thought that's more talk.
It's engagement on small talk.
It's engaging.
Hey, today you're on top. City, I'll give you that one.
Okay, so the conversation continues. We're looking at, there's so many things. The debt crisis that the country is in at the moment. Clearly, the financial on-the-knee status that Kenya is in. And today we're looking at the effect that it will have on citizens in terms of taxes, because the question is, we've been saying, and it seems like, how will Kenyans pay? How will this be paid for? Well, Kenyans will pay for it. And one of the primary ways that Kenyans will pay for this debacle that we are in is via taxes. There will be the introduction of more taxes. There will be the increment of the already existing taxes. Yes.
Do we actually have a debt crisis?
Hey, City.
CT.
If you do not know we do, then maybe you're evading all your taxes. You're not feeling it.
Do we have a debt
Of
crisis?
course we do. That is why.
We owe money, but does it constitute a crisis?
Yes, the moment you get into the fiscal consolidation program of the IMF, the lender of the last resort, you're effectively going into receivership. You're saying we cannot handle.
We cannot afford the country.
We began negotiations with the IMF in 2019, not 2020 because of COVID, but in 2019 pre-COVID, because already we had a problem. So what is happening is our debt repayment rate is outstripping our ability to raise revenue. Now, CT, you said it yesterday. The IMF has this standard remedy that they go and implement around the world. It works for some countries, for some it doesn't
does
work.
not.
And the question we are asking, are the remedies the IMF have put in place for us under this program going to work for Kenyans? Or will they take us back to the structural adjustment programs? And what are those remedies?
When the remedies don't work on their own, there have to be people who are determined to ensure that whatever can work, works. Now, whether it is IMF or it is a Chinese or whoever it is likes doling out money to third world banana republics like ours. The truth of the matter is, what we're calling a debt crisis is a symptom. It is not the problem.
Well, how about we start off with just that? And there are two gentlemen who are going to join us in the conversation this morning. And the first of them, you can see us. We can see you. Geoffrey Koech is legal and policy advisor with the National Taxpayers Association and also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Karibu sana to the Situation Room this morning.
Thank you so much.
Also joining us on the line is Jason Braganza, who is the executive director of Afrodad, a regional body dealing with matters, finance as well as community and social issues. So Karibu sana as well, Jason.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us in the room today. So let's start off. There's a little bit of a quibble here. Are we in a debt crisis? Let's start there before we actually start to look at the issues surrounding it and how essentially the government expects to get out of it and how then we as citizens are going to be able to live through it. Geoffrey, let's start off with you. Are we in a crisis?
Yeah, I believe we are in a huge crisis because if we are collecting to repay debts, the much we are collecting is channeled towards debt repayment. That definitely tells us that this is a crisis. We are not managing our resources in a way that our own revenues should be used for development and such like things, but that is not the primary thing that our resources are doing. We are collecting to pay debts, and to me that is a clear indication of a crisis.
So, Geoffrey, are you saying that the crisis is in the debt, or is it in the way we manage our affairs?
The management of our affairs translates to the accumulation of debt.
Yes, it does.
We are seeking funds to help us recover from COVID.
Yes.
But what happens? We are squandering these funds.
Yes.
So our management of these finances are leading us to debt because we are borrowing this money to do A, but we end up doing B.
Yes. So the
But
problem
we
isn't
have
the
to-
debt. The problem is our management, our system, specifically the people who manage these affairs on our behalf. That's where the problem is.
Right, but then the question we are asking also is then, if they mismanage, because yes, we are agreeing we have a political problem, a lack of political accountability. What are the impacts on the taxpayer? The finance bill is under discussion at present. This is a structural adjustment finance bill. A lot of what has come to Kenyans by way of taxation since mid last year has been based on the prompting of the IMF, because the IMF believe Kenyans don't pay enough, that there's higher potential for tax, that more Kenyans need to pay more tax. And on some aspects, they are right. On some aspects, they are missing the political economy, because taxation is also about political economy. So are the proposals in the present finance bill, is the focus of government fair to Kenyans? Is this where the money needs to come from? That is the big question.
It is part of the big question.
It is part of the big question, yes.
I agree with what I didn't get your name. I'm sorry.
CT.
You're talking about can you see me, by the way?
No.
No, I can't
It's a
see you,
pity.
but-
So let me describe myself.
Oh, wow.
I am CT Muga. That's the
Yes,
description.
CT Muga.
Yes.
Yes. So I agree with City Muga that our how we use this money is leading us to the crisis. And the reason why I'm saying it's a debt crisis is because during the management of these funds, the mwananchi who's the taxpayer and who's supposed to pay the debt is not involved or considered. But when it comes to repayment, that is when they are calling us, City, you have to pay this through the finance bill. Geoffrey, you have to pay this through the finance bill. But during the misuse of these funds, it's just a political elite game. It's a chess game for the political elite. But the payment now has an adverse effect to us. And later on, we'll be talking about the principles of taxation as they was enumerated by Adam Smith. Where is the fairness in the collection? But we are not certain. Like today, we are just slapped with a tax that we have to pay. The IMF thinks that we are in a position to pay these taxes. So their proposals are aligned towards collection. But you cannot collect from an empty pocket. Like wananchi, they are doing nothing currently. When you look at the cost of doing business is at all-time high. The cost of mere registration of business. We have two tiers of government. The county government is taxing us on this end. We have an obligation to the national government. So the problem is we are not in a position to fully realize the proposals of the IMF. It is taxing us to death, and we cannot realize the revenues that we are setting. It is so ambitious, and we'll end up accumulating the money because there are some of the structural adjustment programs that Kenya has been a beneficiary to all these years. But you see, we don't follow up the proposals to the latter. So we are left in a position whereby we cannot raise enough money to repay the loan. So we will borrow to repay. We will increase our debt ceiling. And the common man here will be left at the mercies of the political elite. That's why you see fuel, the cost of electricity, that in turn affects the cost of productivity in Kenya. So we are not producing anything. We cannot raise money as the common man like you and I.
Like
fund the government.
One of the big proposals now is going to affect the cost of bread.
Yeah.
So the idea of removing basic goods from being zero-rated is something the IMF has been pushing. The Kibaki administration zero-rated a lot of basic goods because they said you need to cushion the most vulnerable, the lower, because, 80% of Kenya's labor force is in the informal sector. And so in terms of earnings, that's really, a very small percentage of Kenyans pay are in the formal economy. So when you're looking at this also high level of inequality, you need to protect the lower level of the taxpayer. So the one thing the Kibaki administration did was to zero rate basic goods.
Right.
As an acknowledgement of saying, yes, we have inequality. And everyone must pay tax, but we also have to acknowledge your ability to pay. Now, the IMF is not happy with that. And they started with, pushing for VAT on fuel. The first time round, they didn't succeed. They succeeded last year. They are still pushing for more. Now we are seeing the zero rating on bread being removed. So we are seeing the protections that are afforded to the lower incomes being eroded under this fiscal consolidation program.
Now, James, if I can just bring in James, I want to ask, so looking at this situation, because it's what you described as Wanjiru is describing this now from where we are. Bringing in Jason. So is this sustainable as we look at it now? If it's prescribed from the lender, if it's prescribed that this is essentially what you must do to be able to, one, pay us our money back and then get on the development track, are we looking at a sustainable way of doing this kind of business where you're borrowing on the one hand and then taxing your people basically to death on the other hand to be able to maintain the status? Jason.
Hi, thank you very much. And first of all, a happy Madaraka Day to everybody in the studio and to all the listeners. I think maybe I'll just pick up the conversation first by saying we are in a debt crisis, and it's a combination of different factors. One is economic structure. One is the other is management, as being discussed by CT, and then there's also governance issues around how debt is being managed and utilized. The important thing is that we're witnessing is that the debt that's being procured or contracted by the government is not necessarily leading to the quick or anticipated tax revenues that were expected when the analysis was being done to borrow. So the rate at which we are borrowing outstrips the rate at which that debt is raising taxes. So that becomes a problem in the first hand. And then when you throw in an economic crisis that's been created by the pandemic, where you have tax revenues almost coming to a halt in many African countries, what you then have is a situation where you have to go back to the lender of last resort, the IMF, and this is a prime opportunity for them to continue with their imposition of conditionalities around the structural adjustment programs. And most often than not, as Wanjiru has said, and as Geoffrey has said, a lot of these programs from the IMF do come with very, very regressive tax measures, some of which we are seeing in the finance bill for 2021. So yes, there is going to be a lot of pain for citizens through taxes. I think personally the revenue expectations are overstated because the Kenya Revenue Authority has, at least for the last decade missed its revenue target. So the ambitions that this new facility or new program is all of a sudden miraculously going to transform that, I think is a little bit misleading, particularly that since we're coming out of or trying to come out of a pandemic and an economic crisis. I think there's a little bit of wool being pulled over our eyes in this instance.
Jason, you work in the regional sphere, and there's a question we asked yesterday. Do these IMF programs work? And are there examples of where they've worked? And maybe linked to that is there an example of where they've been responsive to citizens and the needs of citizens? Because here, that's not the case.
On the whole, no. I think, back in the very early 80s and early 90s, when we first had PRSPs, the Public Reduction Strategy Programs, and the real Structural Adjustment Programs, the SAPs, many of them failed. There's been a lot of analysis and research that looked at how, the advice to literally privatize a lot of state entities and remove them from the control of the state, failed. In the mid 90s, Ghana was the gold standard, to the best of my recollection. But since then, there has been very little evidence to show that fiscal consolidation programs, especially those associated with cuts in public spending and public investments, together with expanding the tax base via the citizen as opposed to via economic activity, so expanding the economic or diversifying the economic structure, does not work. And what ends up happening is that there is actually a stagnation of economic growth and a lot of pressure being given on citizens to make up the deficits that are being accrued by the government. So to the best of my knowledge, these types of programs do not transform or actually create a condition where economies can transform themselves from the low tax base to a more broader tax base that's being observed in middle-income countries or countries in Europe and North America.
Jason, is it that these programs in and of themselves are ineffective and they don't work, or is it that the leadership of the countries where these programs have been initiated have taken advantage of what has been proposed to benefit themselves, and so as a result of that, the programs just end up going belly up?
You're a provocateur, CT. No, it's a combination of both. I think by the time you end up signing on to these programs, you're already on your knees as a government. Your space, your wiggle room is very limited. Therefore, you've got very little flexibility. And I think this is generally an accepted state of affairs when you enter these types of programs. The second part to this coin, of course, is the governance structure that we have in our region, on our continent, by and large, where then, as Geoffrey said, the political elites do try and take advantage of this situation. They hoodwink the public, of course, and a lot of the resources then find themselves doing other creative things within the economic system. Mm-hmm. So I think you have a point there to push this governance issue, because it's absolutely correct. But we must not take away the fact that your flexibility once you sign up to these programs are quite restricted, and it's indicative to where you are as an economy. You're sort of in the IC. You've sort of come out of ICU and are opening the door to HDU, if you like to use a medical analogy there.
You see, the medical analogy, if you are talking about an ICU and an HDU, it takes into account a simple fact that you are receiving medication and that you are willing to receive the medication. But we are in an HDU ICU situation where there is medication that we can take and is available, but we don't take it. It is called actually ensuring that you do everything that you possibly can. For instance, you're talking about loans and you're talking about utilization. What about simply stopping these so-called development projects which seem to suck up everything.
Legacy projects. It's
Or
the legacy
call them
projects.
what
Whatever
you
you
Not
want.
all development projects, it's the legacies.
Baptize them as you see fit, but they just suck up everything that seems to be brought into the country, and we know why.
But CT, the point is you're missing the
Am I?
argument, or you're not helping take this argument forward. Why? We have signed.
You
no,
mean
no,
to
no.
say
Let me finish.
I'm not getting in. I'm not in tune with the program.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Your program. You're
All right.
not on
Towing the
you're not on
line
the
the way
program.
she wants you to tow
You're
it.
taking us offline.
Okay. Let me. move
The
on
line
to
is
the-
this one.
Tell me about the program.
The line is this one, CT. We have signed this agreement.
Oh, I know that.
Government has signed on our behalf.
Oh, yes, they have.
As they sign, we will pay.
Yes.
IMF has come and done a whole due diligence. And if you are to put these issues to the IMF, they say, no, but we've looked at these indicators, government has shown willingness to comply. So the question is, what do we do? Because IMF is saying they've done their due diligence to get us into this. They say they're not dealing with the Banana Republic. They say government has shown a willingness to comply. Yet, we know not. So,
Wanjiru.
Jason, what do we do?
Wanjiru, are they also telling us that we cannot stop these projects? Are they telling us we can't say, okay, halt,
They have-
no more expenditure on these
No,
projects?
no,
Are
the
they also
doc-
telling us that?
The document deals with some of them. So actually, the recommendations in the report are, okay, the tax ones are a problem because the tax ones reflect the IMF thinking. In terms of curbing expenditure, the devil is in the detail because they say curb. They actually say there are 500 projects that need to be removed from the budget.
Good.
Which is a good thing. They also say you have to get rid of exemptions, these political exemptions. We lost 600B in 2019 in exemptions that are, some of them are dubious, politically motivated, companies merging with other companies and writing off some huge amounts in terms of exemptions. So there are many proposals in the report that are excellent for Kenya. But the trick is this. There are then others that are not excellent for Kenya.
But who
And
is to
then-
make that decision does not rest the responsibility of the IMF. And I
That
think
is
that's
the
where I'm
question.
I'm
Thank you.
agreeing right there.
Yeah, but then where
that
does
the
that put us?
government can make a decision which they are not making right now. It doesn't make sense that already you're on your knees, as Jason has said, as Geoffrey has alluded to, already on your knees. Somebody is coming to give you help. They've given you the spoon. Do you now want them to take the spoon and dip it into the food and then stuff it down your throat? There are decisions then that you must make. It is very clear right now, development projects don't make sense for the economy of this country.
But-
Put them on hold.
But there's this. The IMF is giving this money out in tranches. So what is going to happen is government is going to fulfill some of the conditions. It will overtax us.
Okay.
Why I don't quite agree with CT is we've agreed we have an expenditure problem. We've got a debt problem. Actually, an expenditure crisis, debt crisis, a political crisis, all coming together. And even the IMF said, we've got
We don't have
a
a
3-in-1.
crisis.
Now, the problem that we have is then the IMF has come and gotten into an agreement with the Kenyan government, has put in some good things in there, some bad things in there that Kenyans will be forced to bear, and Kenyans have no say. So the real problem here is that we are sitting ducks without a say in the IMF program, without real say in our budget process. At least when there's pushback, there's political pressure, Parliament will relent on taxation. But there are other decisions the government is making without public scrutiny. So the reason why I kind of agree with you, City, but don't quite,
You
is
have
because
relented.
the IMF is not necessarily the bad guy in this situation and is not the good guy, because they got into an agreement with the government that violates and betrays all its undertakings. And they have signed and said, we believe they will. They haven't in the last 6 years. Why do you think they will?
But
the IMF also did not insist on the oversight and enforceability. Why? Because for them, their interest is the global economic situation,
Yes.
is them getting their money back.
Yes.
So the point I'm making is that we need to open up this IMF program. It gives us an opportunity to hold government to account, but we need to push back against both the IMF as well as the Kenyan government. And the question is, how do we do that?
Jason, How do we do that? And I think Geoffrey can wade in on this as well. So we can kick off with Jason. How do we do that? I mean, it sounds very prescriptive. We must then be part of the conversation. We must agitate towards government. We must open up the discussion. But how? How is that supposed to be done?
I think there's a number of ways that are already constitutionally in place, right? I mean, the finance bill, for example, is open for public consultation. I think we need to have more conversations like the one we're having this morning to interrogate in a lot more depth what the proposals there mean from a public debt point of view. We need a lot more public and civic education around what public debt actually means. You'll be surprised, actually, the Treasury, and I will have to give credit where it's due. They do publish a lot of the debt information. It's not the easiest place to find it. The website is a minefield, but it is out there. It is in the public domain. We need a lot more civic engagement and civic education on understanding what exactly public debt looks like in the country. The development projects that CT and Wanjiru have spoken very passionately about, we again need to continue paying very close attention to what is involved in those projects and the financing aspects especially. So, for example, when we talk about some of the exemptions that are being proposed in the finance bill in the extractive sector or other sectors in the digital space, what does that actually mean? Recently, there were exemptions that were passed in the House for Japanese consultants, companies that are working in special economic zones. What does that actually mean for Kenyan citizens, and how do we engage in those conversations? So I think a lot more pressure there, a lot more pressure on the transparency, accountability, and governance agenda. And this is a lot of what the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, together with some of the work Afroda does on trying to push this agenda at the national level. We have something called the African Borrowing Charter, which stipulates or sets out a set of principles that guides how the general public can engage on public debt issues with their parliamentarians, with the government. So there's a lot more work there. A lot more activism needs to come out. And I think that can only be done once there's a deeper understanding of what and how public debt looks like in our country.
And from your end, Geoffrey, what do you think? I mean, we're talking about citizens then bearing the brunt of this without even knowing it. But guess what? Kenyans, at the end of the day, for fear of, prosecution or anything else, will just up and pay the taxes. Would rather do that than get into any kind of sticky situation. So what must happen?
First of all, I think the political elite have pushed us to the limit, and they know one thing, that Kenyans are resilient lot. Indeed, we are. However, it's a matter of them taking advantage. And what CT has said, that it's all about the management. When you look at our governance structure, I'll say this without fear of contradiction, because Parliament is the weakest link, especially on public finance management. I miss the days of the Honorable Speaker Marende, where Parliament could have a stand on something. The current Parliament cannot sanction the CS Treasury and question him on anything. When the bill is proposed or anything, it just sails through Parliament. And that's why we are seeing the judiciary as our last line of defense, because we are at the mercy of the executive. It has swallowed in Parliament. So when you look at the finance bill, you look at the IMF, we look at the loans that we are seeking, it's up to Parliament to question all these things. But we look at the select committees, they are inviting the suspects of these COVID billionaires from KEMSA. And nothing is done beyond that. Parliament cannot do anything apart from just questioning them and letting them go. We look at our parliamentarians, especially the youthful ones. They are on Twitter complaining with us. So you question yourself, you have a platform, but you are here with me on Twitter.
And you, who is supposed to be in that position, legislating for some things, are complaining like I am. So who is to help the other?
Exactly, because you see their main roles are representation, oversight, and legislation.
Right.
The finance bill is before them. It's all about legislation. They look at it and say, we do away with this one, we do away with this, we do away with this one. They look at the money that is coming, oversight. How is this money spent? And you see how we Kenyans flooded the IMF pages on Twitter and Facebook.
Yes.
Asking the IMF not to give us this money. The MPs, in their wisdom,
Joined.
of which they lack, they should have picked up the activism of the people and go to Parliament and tell the CS we are not taking this loan. You see, the Kenyans are saying that we should not take these loans, or even if we are taking them, let us direct them to specific projects. The same as what Jason has said, projects that are going to help us to pay these loans. We are looking at the project the government is doing, and we are wondering, how will we get the money from? How the 3 billion pot in Kisumu, how will we raise 3 billion from that pot?
You know, Geoffrey, I think we're being unfair to our parliamentarians.
Yes.
Interesting.
You see, why I'm thinking we're being unfair, you actually expect these people to legislate. You actually expect them to hold the executive to account. I mean, for heaven's sake. What makes you think that we voted them in? That's what we thought. But these people are parliamentary entrepreneurs. They are not there to do these things that you ask. They are there to figure out how much money, yes, are we getting, that they get. But then how do we ensure that we benefit directly? These are businessmen and women. They're not what we think they are. So we elect them as one thing, and they morph before our very eyes and become creatures that we have difficulties understanding. Now, let us deal with the creatures as they are, not as
We expect them to be,
yes,
not
not the
aspirational.
aspirational creatures that we thought they were going to be. So when you're talking about the political class, and this includes them as well, or people who are hell-bent on doing this corrosive business that they have because of the might and the positions that we've given them, to expect them to do whatever we expect, a complete waste of time, because they will not do it. They have shown us consistently that they have no interest whatsoever in ensuring that they actually serve the people who elect them. They are not going to do that.
City, the needle is in the well. What are you proposing? Because what you're telling us, I think, reflects the sentiments of majority of Kenyans, that we are fed up with the lack. And by the way, to be fair to Parliament, they do investigate, like you say,
They
COVID
don't.
billionaires.
No, they don't.
They investigate medical equipment service
They don't.
corruption.
Then when they finish investigating, they pack the paper
they
and leave it to gather dust.
They make recommendations that are not implemented. Where they catch us is, if you check, did they go through all the motions? Yes. There are recommendations there. Right now, actually, to be fair again, or to be alert, Parliament has told the CS all borrowed money must be earmarked. So they must know where it's going.
Of course
it's
they
not
must.
it's not the first time they're saying that.
And do you know why they're saying
the
it?
the point is this. The point is this. Parliament says the right things if you look at the records. They have actually, last year they demanded the list of projects from the CS. The CS didn't produce them. They have again demanded.
But do you know why they
so the
demand
question
those lists,
is, the
Evangelina?
thing to watch, will they pass the finance bill? Will they pass the budget? Because the CS has not complied. Actually, there is now a list of projects in their estimates. But that list does not give the information that is required to hold them to account. So the point I'm making is this. The devil is in the detail, and we are being played. And this game actually requires you to dig through
But
documents and reports.
We're actually not being played. You see, these people keep showing us very clearly what
they are. And I
Yes.
keep saying, when somebody shows you their hand, this is not a game of poker when you're keeping your cards close,
No.
played to your chest.
they're being-
They're
they're being
showing
played like
you
this.
like this. And we choose not to believe it. I don't understand. How much more clear is it supposed to be?
Yes, but then the needle is in the well, and I'm asking, how do we get it out? Because we can do what we are doing here. We are discussing the needle. We're like, oh dear, it's gone. Oh dear, now we can't do this. We've agreed the needle is in the well. What do we do? Jason
Forget
says...
the well and forget the needle.
Uh-huh.
Okay? In fact, demolish that well. It's causing us unnecessary problems.
Okay.
Why should we be thinking of going into a well
Into
to
the
look for
well
a
so that you can
silver
also
needle
drown
when you
together
know very
with the
well
needle?
when you know very well you can buy other needles.
Send them
Okay?
home.
We are going to send them home.
But now when?
But the same thing-
What are
oh, no,
you
no.
saying? City, give us a solution.
Wait.
Our elections are rigged. They don't work.
Oh, no, our elections work very well.
They don't work.
Oh, they work.
2017 election did not work.
It worked.
It did not work. It was rigged.
Look.
And people died because of that rigging.
Look.
And results were computer generated. So
Okay.
how the needle is in the well CT, give us a solution.
Okay.
Our problem is
You know
we
what,
are
you know what
in
you're asking me to give you is a
perpetual
solution.
diagnosis.
It's a solution that will make you happy.
No.
Okay? Yes.
Any solution. Right now, you're giving me diagnosis, and I agree with most of it. But what do we do?
Actually, we are doing what should be done.
I think it is very necessary to put, first of all, because even if you look at the stages of any process that you go through, the first thing that you must do is realize that there's a problem. If you had Kenyans wallowing about in this situation, you really don't know what's going on. But to start to dissect some of these issues and to have these conversations, I believe it is absolutely
See it for what
necessary
it is.
to
But
put
if-
it out there, seeing it for what
but
it is.
if there's a
Many
problem-
people did not know that there was this IMF problem. Many people, we need help for the economy. We're getting money from IMF. Period.
Problem
solved.
solved.
Let me ask you then.
Now, when you start to open it, there's an insight that you have given to people that they previously did not have. And I think
Great.
that is you can't solve the problem in its entirety at once.
But you can't solve
start to
something you don't even understand or
you
know.
have to start to chip away at it
What
and
can
understand
we
what the
do?
problem really is. And this is, I think, we are doing.
Jason has told us there's an opportunity on the finance bill. Parliament has to pass this parliament that works for us figuratively.
You
Technically.
mean this group of profiteers whom we refer to as parliamentarians?
Right. There's a finance bill on the table. There's a budget on the
Yes.
table. They have given conditions to the CS that the CS has not met. What can we do to ensure that they do not pass that budget until the CS meets those conditions?
Okay, Jason, take a stab at it, please. Please.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think Geoffrey has touched on this. In addition to the public submissions, public interest litigation is a route that can actually work. The judiciary, as Geoffrey said, has been very progressive. If you look over the last 5 or 6 years on issues of tax and fiscal matters, they pronounced themselves very strongly on the Kenya-Mauritius double tax agreement, for example, a couple of years ago, which was quite monumental, where they declared it illegal and unconstitutional because the government didn't follow laid out processes for signing double tax agreements, which, by the way, is a contribution to the tax revenue drainage this country faces. Which then leads to the indebtedness that we're facing, and then this vicious cycle of having to borrow to pay back that we've been discussing the entire time. Recently on the BBI, a massive ruling there on the constitutionalism of the BBI. So I think, we need to start also sort of reflecting back into the early 90s, when there was a lot of legal activism that was going on and use of the law to advance civic movements and civic mobilization on the impunity that the government of that day was taking on, and also the impunity of the government of today that is currently practicing. And I think that's the word that I would use. It's not anything other than just impunity, and the fact that the politicians are very good at then dividing along factional lines to then create that atmosphere where one is a victim and one is the transgressor. And you then have to choose which evil you want to support, and forget that both of them are exploiting the citizen for not even a positive gain, but for negative gain, which is extraction, political extraction. So I think for me, the use of the law, public interest litigation, the judiciary, we're in a good moment with the judiciary. I think we should try and exploit that as much as possible.
Well, I mean, even as the conversations continue, I got to thank both of you for joining us this morning, Geoffrey and Jason, in this conversation. And I mean, I do believe that as we start to talk about it, as you start to rip it apart, open it up, I think those are the first steps into looking into problem solving and solution finding for a lot of these. So I want to say thank you very much, Jason Braganza, who is the Executive Director of AfroDad, and Geoffrey Koech, the Legal and Policy Officer for the National Taxpayers Association. Thank you for being in the Situation Room with us this morning. Asante sana.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.